¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes a todos. Estamos aquí en Presentemanía, bienvenidos. Ya saben, yo soy Pablo Schanton, aquí está Antonia Kon. Nosotros somos los representantes del sur global, mientras está aquí el norte global sería también. El norte global. Ok, muy bien. Pero como sabrán, Presentemanía también tiene mucho que ver con esta idea de que vamos a hacer un diálogo, una dialéctica entre los que somos de generación X y los que son de la generación Z. Y la idea es que incluso sin vergüenza vamos a aceptar vamos a hacer un videogame en donde nosotros vamos a hacer los old farts y ellos van a hacer los braironts. O sea, de alguna forma vamos a tener algunas pequeñas guerras. La idea de esto es que es una especie de sitcom, como ven, estamos sentados tipo casados con hijos, y entonces vamos a ver un poco el Reynolds Continuum. Este es el Reynolds Continuum. Y lo primero vamos a empezar un poco con una historia que tiene que ver con Caja Negra y Simon Reynolds, porque el cumpleaños tiene que ver un poco con esto, con también recordar ese momento. Y lo primero que quería decirles es por qué se me ocurrió que también tenía que venir el hijx, tenía que venir Kieran, además de Simon. La idea era no hacer el repaso de los old farts, que en español sería algo así como viejos chotos o viejos meados, haciendo un repaso de todo lo que habían vivido en relación al rock, sino también desafiarnos, y por eso hicimos esta especie de pared del Miró, que es como si fuera un caos del multiverso, donde tenemos diferentes temas, porque es lo más parecido a aquello de lo que vamos a hablar, ¿no? Es decir, hoy en la cultura digital nos encontramos con un montón de información y tenemos que saber hacer caminos, como las hormigas, adentro de ese mar, de esa matrix, de esa matriz de información. Pero lo que me interesaba también en relación a Antonia y también en relación a Kieran es que ellos todavía hacen crítica pop, aun cuando no la hagan en papel como lo hacíamos nosotros o en gráfica, sino que lo hacen en la web y en diferentes columnas que tienen. Vos lo haces en la agenda, él lo hace en Pitchfork, y entonces tienen sus columnas propias. Pero lo que quería empezar para hablar con Simon es en relación a cuál es el lugar que tiene ese crítico pop, o pop writer, como se dice en inglés. Porque yo le decía que cuando él estaba en Melody Maker, se lo criticaba porque era el intelectualoso, era demasiado intelectual. Podía citar a Roland Barthes, podía citar a Julia Kristeva en una nota sobre una banda de rock. Pero al mismo tiempo, cuando ustedes entran al blog de Simon, al Bliss blog, hay una partecita que dice Simon Reynolds Level, porque hubo un crítico de Mark Fisher, de quien vamos a hablar muy especialmente en un momento, que decía que Mark Fisher tenía una cultura del nivel de Simon Reynolds. Entonces hay un lugar en el medio, que sería interesante analizarlo, que no es ni el populismo periodístico, ni tampoco el academicismo más burocrático, ni siquiera el discurso académico. ¿Dónde se ubica ese discurso que nosotros practicamos?
Well, first, I'd like to say thank you to Caja Negra for inviting us to join them for their celebrations. 20 years, it's amazing. Thank you to them for publishing my books in Spanish and allowing me to reach a completely different and new readership. And I wanted to thank the translators who are working tonight, and also the translators of the books. And also I wanted to thank you for coming. And I think you should all give yourselves a round of applause for because it's amazing. I don't think I was, an audience this big for books. It's hard to think. I can't think of a publisher, actually in America, a similar publisher or a publisher in the UK that could have an event like this. And I think it's, a testament to the passion for reading and for books and ideas. And so, bravo. So you wanted to know about, I've forgotten what the question was. It was like,
No, yo lo que te preguntaba es esto que pones en el blog
Yeah.
del Simon Reynolds Level, que es la visión desde la academia, y que siempre te criticaron por el intelectualoso
Yeah.
en cuando hacías periodismo en Melody Maker
Yeah.
o en otros lados.
yeah, well, what it is there's this guy on Twitter who, every time the name Mark Fisher comes up, he says, I never thought he was that great, and he's not like a serious academic, and he does like a kind of Simon Reynolds level culture blog, and he uses that same phrase about 12 times, you know. I admit, I word search my name on Twitter, so that's how I see it come up all the time. And I thought it was really funny, in a way, that I would be like the lower level to which Mark Fisher is accused of operating. But I thought it was a good level, because that is the level I operate on, which is, I'm not like an academic. I didn't do a PhD. I didn't do, I just got a regular BA, but a Bachelor of Arts. But I had a sort of secondary study in my spare time of reading theory, but reading in a very kind of indiscriminate way, like sort of unsystematic. And I grew up reading these music writers before me who combined philosophy and critical theory with very kind of vernacular language and passion and poetic imagery about music. So that's kind of what I wanted to do. And I think it's between, it's between academia and scholarly work and between, I don't want to say the street, but it's like, it's like everyday passionate language about music. And that's the level I'm happy to operate on. Sorry, that was a long reply.
No, ahora no, está perfecto. Siempre acordémonos de hablar lento para la traductora, cosa que me lo digo a mí mismo. Otra de las cosas que también quería hablar antes de que hablemos los cuatro es la relación de la palabra con la música, que también siempre fue muy criticada. Hay una frase muy conocida que dice, escribir sobre música es como bailar sobre arquitectura, que se dice que lo dijo Zappa o lo dijo Elvis Costello. Nunca se sabe el origen de eso. Pero siempre se pensó que era inútil escribir sobre música, que es lo que nosotros hacemos finalmente. Pero yo quiero recordar en el año 1988, cuando tuve una epifanía leyendo una reseña de un grupo londinense que se llamaba The House of Love, cuando sale el primer álbum, en Melody Maker, Simon Reynolds escribe en la reseña esta comparación que me voló la cabeza. Fue para mí como una epifanía total. Que decía, la guitarra de Terry Bickers, que era el guitarrista, suena como la luz que nombra Van Morrison en una canción de Astral Weeks. A mí me mató eso, porque tuve que ponerme a pensar un montón cómo suena eso. Ahora, ustedes dirán, claro, era otra época, 1988. Uno tenía que ir a comprar un disco, salir de la casa, juntar la plata, comprarse el disco. Y los que escribíamos tratábamos de o alimentar el deseo del que fuera a comprar o realmente decirle no vayas a comprar esto por tales y cuales razones. Pero a mí me encantaba esa idea de, siempre en los talleres trato de hablar de esto, que escribir sobre música también es como escribir sobre perfumes, que es lo que dice Brian Eno, ¿no? Buscar metáforas exactas. Brian Eno dice, ¿cómo se describe la guitarra de Jimi Hendrix en Voodoo Child? Eso no puede ni hacerlo ni un musicólogo ni alguien que sea especialista en la guitarra. Por eso somos necesarios. Entonces, lo que quería preguntarte era eso. Bien general, ¿para qué sigue sirviendo escribir sobre música en el año 2025?
I think, obviously now you can hear everything, and that function of, I would buy records based on reviews, and it was like a leap of faith in a way. Like you're kind of like, this review is so amazing, and could the record possibly be as good? And actually, 8 times out of 10, it really was. Because I knew which writers to trust. I had the people I followed, and they were like usually really, infallible in their taste and judgment. So but that function is gone, you know, and now now I think it's much more about helping people, like what Kieran does, where he kind of maps out what's going on and identifies new patterns in music. It's like a macro thing, like the big structure of the music scene, but then it could be just a very intense listening to a record and pulling out all the meaning and, for me, even the redescription of musical pleasure, I think, is such a difficult thing to do that it's interesting to see someone try to do it.
Ok.
The pointlessness, I suppose what I'm saying is the pointlessness is the point, in a weird way.
Ahora vamos a pasar a Kieran en este sentido, en que ya no es la misma situación de las que hablaba antes, de cuando en la época analógica, porque tanto Simon como yo somos anfibios. Mitad de la vida la pasamos analógicamente y mitad de nuestra vida la estamos pasando digitalmente. Aquellos que son nativos digitales a veces escuchan primero el disco y después leen la crítica, si es que la leen. Entonces, Antonia, ahí sí que queremos saber cómo pasó aquello de dedicarse a lo mismo que el padre, ¿no?
Sí, yo leía los libros de Simon y en Retromanía apareces como este niño que colecciona las cartas de Pokémon, después en Futuromanía escuchan Daft Punk y a vos te interesa más lo que suceda dentro de Minecraft que una idea lineal sobre el futuro. Entonces, primero quería preguntarles si hay alguna retroalimentación entre sus miradas del mundo y de la música.
Well, first I want to say thank you so much for having me, Caja Negra. It's an honor to be out here, especially with these great journalists and my dad. We've never gone on just a trip with us before, so this is great. Thank you. I gotta apologize for my voice also. I think I was singing too much today and I straightened it. Maybe it'll add some like experimental ASMR texture. You were asking like what is sort of the relation between my and my dad's writing? Yeah, I think like I have sort of the similar, it's something in the DNA and the genetics of like wanting to map things out, like cartography, trying to kind of assess different scenes and understand something when it's in its infancy. And I think I'm always trying to like chase for new innovations or like the most like kind of groundbreaking thing, the most abrasive. And I grew up on the internet, on algorithms. And so for me, I feel like a lot of people don't like to write about the internet in the context of music. And I think the internet, it's good and it's bad in a lot of ways, but it's kind of unavoidable because it mediates so much of our existences now. And so for me, as somebody who, you know, grew up playing Minecraft and making YouTube videos, like, of course, I find 100 geeks doing a rave in Minecraft really interesting. And so for me, that feels like kind of ground zero for a lot of new music scenes happening. They're all starting online, and I love exploring that.
And you were also doing your montage parody stuff, weren't you? Like those films you were making on YouTube.
Yeah, I used to have a semi-successful YouTube channel where I was doing basically like these mashups of like Skrillex music on top of gameplay footage, defacing it with just like rainbows and Snoop Dogg smoking a joint. And I still think it's some of the most avant-garde video stuff of the last, you know, couple decades. The TikTokers haven't caught up to us yet.
Pensaba en el tipo de escritura a la que vos y yo nos dedicamos. Yo le di el nombre de Brain Rot Practice porque mientras escribimos sobre un disco lo estamos escuchando, pero también estamos leyendo todo lo que se dice sobre ese disco simultáneamente y lo que el artista dijo sobre ese disco. Entonces estamos de alguna manera navegando como esta hipersaturación de contenidos y buscando, seleccionando entre la basura qué es lo que más nos interesa. No sé qué pensás de esto.
Yeah, I think that is almost one of the reasons why it's important to be a music critic now, because despite, you know, there's just so much noise and it's so difficult to find the signal, and like everybody thinks they're a critic now because they can listen to anything and like have an opinion on rate your music. But I think, having somebody who can really spend time thinking about the context, and connecting it with music history rather than just like firing off a take, can help you see music in a new light. And I do think also like it's very funny calling it like a brain rot practice. I feel like being a critic is almost knowing what information to accept and what to not accept, or not to try and dive into and make perfect, because if you go down the rabbit hole of obsessing over reading everything the musician has said, or trying to understand every little nitty-gritty thing, then you sometimes lose your own voice in that. And I think I love trying to integrate my own voice, and I love reading something where I can tell somebody has a clear perspective, because there are just so many random people online firing off thoughts. If you can sculpt yours, it's much cooler.
It's very different from when I started writing, where you wrote about things in a kind of informational vacuum. Like the record would arrive, maybe you'd remember a few things you'd read in an interview they'd done like a year before. Like the press release probably didn't have much information, and there was nowhere to look. You could, so the record was like a blank canvas that you could just kind of project your fantasies on. Whereas now, if I review a record, which I don't do very often, but if I do, I could do like research, and get like 50 pages of documentation on what the band were trying to do and what people think of them, and so it's a hyper-saturated environment in terms of opinion and people, artists talking about their motives and what they're trying to do. It's very different from when I could write about a band like My Bloody Valentine and really just kind of use it as a blank, fairly blank canvas, just to put whatever I was obsessed with at that time onto.
And I think it can, having this like overwhelming avalanche of information can result in like a lot of timidity, I think, among some younger writers, especially like it's very scary in a way to be online and writing something. Like if I do a Pitchfork review, it's like, people tend to care about that, or the artist cares about that, and it's very nerve-wracking anticipating a response. And so I think a lot of people don't say their true feelings because of this sort of like parasocial environment online now. More?
Y ahora tengo que hacer la pregunta al padre. ¿Qué sentiste cuando tu hijo te dijo, papá, voy a ser crítico de rock? Es decir, te voy a ser pobre. El precariato de la escritura sobre música.
Well, Kieran actually was earning quite a bit of money from his YouTube stuff, and so, and it had to go to me because I think for some legal reason PayPal could only send it to an adult. So all these amounts of money were coming into my email every month. I was like, this is great. This is going to pay for his college education. But then something happened to the scene. It kind of died, right, or something. Or
Yeah.
YouTube changed its pay remuneration system.
Yeah, the algorithm shifted.
So like, it was down to like $40 a month. I was very sad. But I thought Kieran would like invent an app or something like that. But
you thought that of me? Damn.
yeah, something involving video or computers, digital technology. But you've chosen this disappearing career.
What are you talking about? You made me every day when I got home from school do a boot camp of a new album review when I was 7.
Something happened at college. He just joined the college magazine and worked in the art section, and then you started reviewing gigs, and I didn't necessarily know it was going to lead to you actually, making a living at it and becoming well-known, and it was very surprising. Yeah, it wasn't anything that was planned at all.
Ok, bueno, ahora vamos vieron que yo les dije, Vivi Tellas, le debo muchísimo, biodrama estamos haciendo, reproches, padre, hijo, padre. Vamos ahora, que vos querías pasar el tema sobre...
Sí,
Decilo, contalo.
yo pensaba en esta sensibilidad hipersaturada de la que hablábamos antes y me interesa que traigas esto de los montajes de YouTube porque vos hace poco lo entrevistaste a Fortnite, es un rapero de acá de Argentina, y dijiste que te interpelaba mucho su manera de relacionarse con las imágenes, que creo que es muy paradigmática de esta manera que tenemos nosotros. Lo voy a mostrar brevemente.
Bienvenido al primer EP de Austin Fortnite.
Se ha detectado alto tema. Suave.
Bueno, se dan una idea.
Nosotros somos fans.
Did anybody leave the room?
In a funny sort of way, it reminds me of the Butthole Surfers and bands I would have been into where they were chewing up all of rock history in this kind of crazy psychedelic maelstrom, and then they would have projections behind them on stage of car crashes and horrible surgeries, and they were trying to overload the senses in a more analog era way. But it's the same thing. It's like, what a crazy, mad world we live in, and we're just going to barrage you with information and, crazy sounds, and distorted sounds. It's kind of a new psychedelia, isn't it, in a lot of ways?
Yeah, I was actually kind of amazed when I first interviewed August like 2-ish years ago, and we just like called on WhatsApp, and he was in the middle of a random forest, and the police came, and he was very fried. But he told me, I think he was like 15 years old then, and he said he grew up watching montage parodies, which were the things that I made on YouTube a decade ago. And so watching these videos, I'm like, I could see how somebody breastfed on just like content like this would, the way you can kind of transform it into this almost like avant-garde art that like captures your overwhelmed mental state. And I wrote a piece where I called it like shitpost modernism, or this collision between these kind of like vulgar, distorted aesthetics and just like sonic invention in a way.
Una cosa que sucede, y esto a favor de Internet, esto es para hacer un paréntesis sobre algo que es interesante, y es que yo a los Swagger Boys los conocí por Kieran, que era un señor que está en Estados Unidos. Y al mismo tiempo lo que sucedió en estos días que estuvimos con ellos es que cuando le dije cuando Simon me preguntó cuál era el disco de noise pop o de shoegaze latinoamericano o argentino más importante, yo le dije que era Dynamo, de Soda Stereo del año 92, y él no lo conocía el disco. Es decir, el disco que a los Swagger Boys los conocía a través de Kieran, que es algo que podía haber estado en Internet. En cambio, Simon no conocía lo que era un disco acá en Sudamérica que había salido, que era muy parecida a la música que podía estar haciendo My Bloody Valentine. Eso digo, para que entendamos un poco las diferencias y volvemos a los old farts versus brain rot. Ahora, podríamos decir esta frase de que el influencer mató al ídolo del periodismo pop, lo terminó matando con todo lo que hace un influencer. La idea, por ejemplo, de reacción. La reacción me mata a mí, esa que ponen un disco, lo paran y ponen un emoticón de cara. Esa es la que más me mata. O todo lo que sucedió ahora con Rosalía, que es un poco lo que estamos hablando en relación a lo que se suele llamar discourse, ¿no? Así como en general. O sea, que aparece un disco de Rosalía y empieza una especie de metástasis, de exégesis de todo el mundo explicando el disco, y uno se olvidó del tema, de cuando había salido Berghain. Yo ni me acordaba de cómo era el tema, pero entrabas a scrollear y estaba lleno de gente hablando sobre ese disco. Y a veces era como performeaban Wikipedia, decían todo lo mismo. Entonces ahí, ¿cuál era el plus? El carisma, que es otra cosa. Por eso digo, los influencers mataron a los ídolos del periodismo de pop. Yo sé que no, pero quiero que ustedes me digan.
Me, right? Okay. Yeah, I think everything is like downstream of tech now, and we live in the clip farm, rage bait economy, and it's just like a fact that a lot of people aren't reading words anymore. Like there's still obviously a massive contingent of the population that is literate, but a lot of people only consume what they see on their feed, and so that has just like unleashed this storm of like a shitpost industrial influencer complex. And even like me, like I'm at Pitchfork and now we've been, pivoting to video again. I'm being poured out on the feed with Instagram Reels. And I think, in some ways you can still do, at least what I want to believe and what we're trying to do is like a way to do video influencer-y journalism with, still a lot of thought and care put into it, because there are a lot of these music influencers who are really just trying to put something out when the album comes out so it gets a lot of views, or they're even being paid by a label and not disclosing that, which is payola, and that is happening a lot. But I hope that there is kind of a middle ground where you can be, I don't know, I mean, it is the idea that if you want to be a writer, you also have to be an influencer is bleak, but I think the biggest writers now are people who can almost like cultivate sort of a parasocial audience, like they're a writer themselves, or they're an artist themselves. And, it's my hope that there's some way that you can do that without fully selling out or not putting thought into the criticism.
Sí. Yo pensaba en los blogs de Simon, que tiene múltiples blogs sobre distintos temas, y en que la figura del escritor bloguero es un poco la contrafigura del periodista influencer, y quizás esto es un poco retromania de mi parte, pero yo añoro mucho ese internet pre-cultura del smartphone, antes de que los multimillonarios fueran dueños de todas las redes sociales, cuando internet era más una enciclopedia y algo lúdico donde podías navegar y podías aprender cosas. Y creo que lo cultivamos un poco armando esta locura, y también lo cultivan los blogs de Simon Reynolds y también las columnas que tratamos de escribir, como quizás un retorno a ese tipo de uso del internet. No sé qué pensás, Kieran.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that's for me, but yeah, I do have a lot of blogs. Blogs are like, they allow me to write in a way where I don't have to be an authority, so I don't have to do any research. I don't have to know what I'm talking about necessarily. In a weird way, I kind of react. I'll see a video, and it might be a current one, but it's more likely to be something from the past. There's this great video of this thing of Tom Jones doing this amazingly sexual dancing, and so I just posted it and talked about a few thoughts that inspired me, and just how amazing it was. And back in the 60s, when people thought that we liberate sex and that would be great. So I'm sort of, in the blogs I explore atemporality, in the sense that I'm just can talk about anything from any time, and also in a kind of unprofessionalized way, in a very kind of quite, I hope, funny or just random kind of way. So in a weird way, it's my own sort of brain rot. But it's like a very relaxed form of writing, and sometimes some interesting ideas come out of it, and sometimes it's just a few laughs. It's like it's some of the most fun writing that I do for me as a writer. But it's not like the books. The books have to be considered and well researched and all those traditional virtues.
I forgot to add to that. I do think the blogosphere of 15, 20 years ago would be a lot preferable to the sort of influencer economy right now. I think even there's kind of people are always perpetually saying that there's a blog era revival, but there are a lot of good blogs, and I think the writing I enjoy reading the most sort of recaptures that early internet spirit you're talking about. Like this guy, my friend Samuel Hyland, has a blog called Sammy's World where he, just out of his own passion will go and hang out with like a niche label and write this like insane 5,000 word sprawling piece that he can only do because it's his own blog that he owns, that's not under editorial discretion. And I do think if writing is going to be sustainable in the future online, when there's no ad revenue and you're forced to become an influencer, the only way to do it is to kind of have like a small self, or like, you and your friends own this blog that you have like a subscription model. Like there are a few publications that do this. And so you're not reliant on these like very shaky digital metrics, and you have people who are committed to supporting your writing. And I feel like if more people did that, we could get back to maybe that early internet vibe.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of very, actually, having said that, there's a lot of blogging that is like very good essays and, well-researched and well-written, and just probably too eccentric in its subject or combination of subjects to be sold to a magazine. And I've done some stuff like that, people like Mark Fisher and with K-Punk, it was very, it was blogging, but it was serious quality writing, amazing level of thinking and the language, So there's, you can do both things with blogs. You can do just random, 50 words, having fun with a video that you found, and then you can do like a 5,000 word essay on comparing a film by Fellini to a film by Wes Anderson. It's all kinds of, it's the full range from very serious but unorthodox writing to just fun.
Explicamos un poco qué es el brain rot, porque tenemos que hablar un poco de esta especie de psicopatología de la vida digital. Pasamos ahí.
Bueno, inevitablemente vamos a hablar de brain rot. Kieran es un poco su expertise. Él en su columna lo que hace es navegar las profundidades de Internet y explicarle a quienes no tienen idea de esto un poco de qué se trata cada fenómeno digital que él se va encontrando. El brain rot italiano acá es muy conocido, sobre todo entre los niños. Son estas criaturas hechas con inteligencia artificial. Pero hay otras tendencias de las que vos hablás que acá en Argentina no son muy conocidas. La más interesante para mí es el core-core, que es algo así como el estadio final de todos los ciclos de modas rápidas de Internet. El sufijo core, que se usa para definir una estética determinada, por ejemplo, cottage-core, acá se repite doble. Y bueno, es este colapso de estéticas, montajes de imágenes que no tienen mucho que ver o que buscan producir una sensación angustiante. Kieran, quizás vos podés explicarlo más.
Yeah, sure. First, I can't believe I've been pigeonholed as the brain rot guy. I'm more than that. But core. Also, I learned that apparently, do people here know what 6'7" is? I heard someone told me that 6'7" hasn't hit. Okay, someone said that it hadn't hit Argentina, and I was like, no way. But I first found core a couple years ago. I think it was like late 2021. And it was basically like this TikTok trend that to me felt like the algorithm like vomiting itself out. It was just like all these, it basically like sort of a parody of the idea of the suffix core, because there was the whole, going back 15 years, Tumblr, like C-Punk, Vaporwave, this internet's obsession with micro-genres. And so we kind of like, after COVID and this manic spawn of like cottagecore and all these things, people were like, we've had enough. And it was just sort of like these frantic montages. And some of them, were very emotional. Like they felt like people were critiquing technology in the way that, social anime and ennui, now in the way that, you'll just cross a homeless person on the street while scrolling on your iPhone without even thinking about it. And it was kind of trying to get you to, I don't know if it was trying to get you to like think more consciously about the world, but at least like manifest these feelings that people had about their smartphone use. And then kind of sadly, like it sort of got co-opted by the own machine it was critiquing. It started becoming this very formulaic trend where a lot of angsty young men who thought that the world was mean to them, they were dreaming of being like Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, and it became this like more misogynistic thing, but for a while it felt kind of like peak brain rot. Peak the act of like what happens after you cook your mind on the algorithm for too long.
I think what's interesting about the term is that it combines this sort of idea of shame and pride, you know, like they're kind of confused. I mean, it's quite punk in a way. Like you think of like the Sex Pistols singing, we're so vacant, we're pretty vacant. You know, it's this sort of a kind of mime of stupidity, of being brain dead, basically. But obviously, that's a very clever idea in a way, and it's sort of. So I think what struck me about Core was it being like meta-genre, like it's like a commentary on the very idea of genre. And genres were something that musicians always used to resist being pigeonholed and labeled as genres. But now musicians are among the most active coiners of genre terms, and it's almost like, I think it started with MySpace, where you had these sort of humorous genre identifiers that bands would. I'm suddenly aware that MySpace is something that some people in the audience may never have heard of, and it's so long ago. But you know, it just seemed to carry on, didn't it? This musicians coming up with crazy names for what they're doing. Right?
Yeah, and I think part of it is like this idea that there is not limited space online, but there's almost like there's too much space, there's too much noise, and so if you like reflexively taxonomize, you invent your own genre that's like giving you a flag where you're like, this is my territory. And it's also a lot easier to make yourself intelligible to an algorithm when you have a name that someone can hashtag on a TikTok video. Yeah, and so many genres that aren't real.
Seguimos con la psicopatología de la vida digital. Ahora deben haber visto muchos de nosotros, lo vimos, el video de Ofelia Fernández sobre las cuestiones de la salud mental en relación a las redes y cómo afectan la salud mental de todos. A mí me sorprendió mucho porque ella dice, estoy analizando cómo un pez está en el agua, porque cómo alguien que está dentro de las redes puede sentir la enfermedad que tiene estando adentro de las redes. Y Simon habló a favor y en contra de dos tendencias o de dos cuestiones que nos puede estar sucediendo. Un diagnóstico que analizó especialmente es el doom scrolling. El doom scrolling, que ahora lo vamos a ver. Y me gustaría que hablemos de esa psicopatología digital, el doom scrolling, que vos hiciste un artículo especial sobre ese tema.
Yeah. In my class that I teach at California Institute of the Arts in a music school, and I don't do this anymore, but at one point I thought I would try and introduce my students to the idea of affect theory. And so I thought, what's a new affect of our time? And the only one, well, the one that came to my mind first was doom scrolling, because it's a new thing that didn't exist. It's like a certain feeling of paralysis, fixation. It's a physical action. It's a bodily, like a bodily disposition of like you're kind of hunched over your phone, and you're just doing it over and over again, and the algorithm is learning what you're stopping to read, so it sends you more and more awful news, and you're just fixated. And I thought that's a new feeling of our time. And then occasionally you get hope scrolling when there's like, you know, some good election results or something, and you're like scrolling through it, you know. But mostly it's doom scrolling, and mostly it's this rotating horoscope of the present. And so that's, yeah, I mean, I think it's just a particular feeling that's new. I think it would be very hard in the past to achieve the same effect. You'd have to get like a great number of newspapers and cut out the newspapers and stick them on a kind of thing that went round and round. And but apparently that's how Bob Dylan wrote "A Hard Day's Rain Is Gonna Fall," where he actually was in the public library in New York, using microfilm, which is a kind of scrolling way of reading newspapers. And it was just all horrible headlines about war and death and awfulness, assassinations and so forth. And so he kind of got into that mentality when he wrote that song. So in a sense, feeling doomy is obviously not a new thing, at least as long as there's been newspapers and mass media and television news, you know, you get something of that effect. But it's a uniquely hyperbolic state with your smartphone.
I think of doom scrolling almost as like gooning for the brain or the amygdala.
¿Cómo te llevas vos con el doom scrolling?
I feel like I have a very tortured relationship with just scrolling in general because I used to work at Business Insider and my role was literally called digital culture reporter, and my boss would demand that I find 3 pitches of like viral TikToks by the first 30 minutes of work. And some of my colleagues had like multiple accounts that they had trained for different algorithms to land them different genre stories. So in a way, even though my job is still very much just like dunking myself in a vat of scrolling all day, it feels a little better. It's like more of a reprieve. I can write about what I want to write about, and I can turn off my phone when I want to turn it off. But I think in general, people, you know, it's very hard when so much of your life, whether it be group chats or your entire job is online, it's like you have to scroll. And I think, you know, I'm a natural optimist and I try and find good things out of the scroll and out of the slop, but it is kind of like numbing and desensitizing just how much stuff you see of like just dead bodies and just like the worst conspiracy theories imaginable. Like after you see that so many times, you just become numb to it, which I don't think is a healthy state for anybody.
Bueno, queríamos ahora pasar a otra de una tendencia que sí te gustaba, Simon, porque una de las cosas que nos pasan a los soul farts a veces es que cuando vemos las nuevas músicas, a veces caemos en la tentación de decir, uy, esto me recuerda, uy, esto me recuerda, y todo resulta derivativo. Entonces, una de las cosas que vos señalaste a partir de un artículo de Kieran es el ASMR, que me encanta decirlo ASMR porque decirlo de esa forma también hace un sonido interesante, que sería respuesta meridiana de la sensibilidad autónoma, que es, ustedes lo deben haber visto básicamente, es hacer sonidos muy suaves frente a, por ejemplo, uno de estos micrófonos, para producir en el otro un cosquilleo, un hormigueo que lo vaya relajando o haciendo dormir, ¿no? Es como una especie de post-ambient, porque la tensión es muy distinta. Es una mezcla entre la narcolepsia y el ambient en un punto. Pero es muy siniestro. Y hay creo que en el artículo de Kieran puso este ejemplo que es realmente terrible.
I'm just gonna cut off your eyelashes. I'm just gonna cut off your eyelashes. If you could just come closer. It's nothing to worry about. We're gonna do. We're gonna do eyelash extensions anyway, so it's fine. Okay, and I'm just gonna cut that off. Okay, good.
¿Por qué te gusta tanto, Simon?
Well, Kieran or me? Well, Kieran sends me a lot of things he's writing about, and he sends me the music, and usually it hurts my ears, or I do that thing that you said, which is like, this is a bit like Jungle from the 90s, but a bit crapper and faster, or like, you know, more distorted. So I'm like the old guy. Like there's a paradigm of this is the critics who said the Sex Pistols are just like the Who, you know, and you don't want to be that guy, but often with the stuff Kieran sends me, I am like,
you say it's all rubbish.
I just like it. It hurts my ears. But this was stuff I was like, whoa, this is really like 21st century. There's nothing like this in the past. he wrote a piece on the avant-garde ASMR, you know, which is still notionally meant to give you the tingles and relax you, but it's really intense and disturbing. And I watched some on the television and I was like, I felt kind of stoned, I was drugged, and there was something about the extreme intimacy of it, some of the vocal things that I actually like avant-garde music concrete that uses the voice, the gestures. I mean, and there are some of them are very funny, like there's ones where like the whole scenario is imagining that you're inside someone's stomach, that you've been swallowed and digested. And then there's another one which is like, what's it like? Struggling to remember now.
You've blocked it out.
Oh no, it was one that was like cleaning your ears out with a Q-tip. And that's really disturbing, especially because there's a TV show that Kieran's mother has written about called Girls, and in one of the episodes, the main character, who has obsessive compulsive disorder, actually pierces her eardrum with a you know, one of those cotton wool bud things. But so it's a lot of this. It sort of goes beyond the relaxation purpose of ASMR to be quite trippy and psychedelic or disturbing, you know. So I haven't spent a lot of time with it because one of the things is they're kind of long, like often 25 minutes long. But it was something that I was blown away by it, and I was like, yeah, this is a new. I don't know if you want to say an art form, but it's a new cultural form that's totally unique to our times, you know.
I think you could call some of it an art form. I spoke to the woman who made that video, and she told me that some of it is like, she's like hyperventilating so much that after doing it for 5 minutes, she gets like nauseous and feels like passing out. So, you know, she's like an athlete. She's doing it for the art. But I was personally just like fascinated by ASMR. I think, you know, I started listening to it when I was probably 13 years old. And I had like a long period where I didn't consume it, watch it, because I thought I got kind of addicted to it. And I'd put it on in the middle of the day and my brain would get all foggy and I wouldn't be able to work. And I was like, okay, this is actually a little psychedelic. But when I came back to it earlier this year to write this piece, I realized that it was you know, like a real genre where people were innovating and they were like kind of pushing it. And I realized like 6 years ago there was a video called the most fast and aggressive ASMR, and to try and get people to tingle, people would like scratch things very intensely. But then now even the normal ASMR is like way faster than what was the fastest all that time ago, and people are like kind of like pushing the bounds in a way to me that felt like it was mirroring music or like a lot of stuff happening in SoundCloud rap. And I thought it was almost kind of like the Brian Eno concept of Scenius, where you have like different people in the scene inventing like little triggers, ASMR triggers, and then other people would adopt them and mash them together into these almost like SoundCloud mashup but whispering videos. And I found that progression really fascinating. But then I think there is also like this negative side to the intimacy of it, where it's like, you know, one of the reasons why it's so big is because so many people are touch starved, and because young people aren't going out as much as older generations, and like instead of going out on a date, they might just stay at home and, you know, watch this like fake form of intimacy. It feels very part of like the hikikomori kind of thing. Even though I don't know how many incels watch this stuff, I think a lot of normally socially adjusted people enjoy ASMR, but I don't know.
Yo quería, ahora estamos por entrar en la zona.
Are you a fan of it, Antonia? Do you like ASMR?
La verdad es que no lo consumo, me perturba un poco.
Y da miedo. Es muy siniestro para mí. Me produce todo lo contrario. Ahora quiero hablar de un tema sobre el que vos escribiste un artículo que me encanta, que es la cuestión de la inteligencia artificial. Escribiste un artículo y le pediste a la inteligencia artificial que te ayude a escribir un artículo al estilo Simon Reynolds. ¿Qué te pasó cuando te apareció el artículo? ¿Qué de vos sabe la inteligencia artificial y qué no te reconociste en lo que te dio, te devolvió?
Yeah, it was about 4 or 5 years ago when ChatGPT was a new thing, and a magazine asked me to write, you know, is AI going to replace critics like me? And obviously, and probably many people would have thought of this idea, but the first thought I had was, can I get AI to write the piece for me? So I said, write an article on the future role of the critic in the age of ChatGPT in the style of Simon Reynolds. And the results were laughable. They were just, it had no good perceptions, but there were no stylistic traits that were like mine. And I tried it. I tried it with Mark Fisher. Again, no different. I tried other, rock critics or critics that had a distinctive style, and it couldn't get any kind of character. And the insights were really boring as well. So I wrote the whole piece, and I was very confident. I was I had fun with it. I said well, until ChatGPT has the narcissism of a critic and enjoys the sound of its own voice, like critics do, then there will never, the future for people like me is guaranteed. And I've also pointed out that ChatGPT can't listen to music. It doesn't have a body. It doesn't feel rhythm. There's no experiential, somatic, neurological, cognitive relationship to music. All it does is gather existing information about whatever it's writing about. However, I tried it again actually this year, just for a laugh, and the results were very unnervingly close to my style. It still didn't have the brilliance of perception, but it had many of my words I use all the time, my favorite constructions and idioms. I tried Mark Fisher again, and it had certain words in common, but also Mark Fisher type words it picked up, and I was like, this is getting very close to, being quite a good imitation of me, and then that made me very concerned about the future. But I think the fact that it still can't actually hear the music and doesn't know what music means emotionally, or it doesn't feel it. It doesn't have sense organs, and it doesn't have a history of listening to music and feeling music and living music. I don't think that can ever be supplied, but it can do quite a good imitation of you, I find now.
Ahora vamos a pasar a Mark Fisher, el momento Mark Fisher. Pero antes le quiero preguntar a Kieran, a un tecno-optimista, ¿qué piensa del uso de la inteligencia artificial en periodismo? Porque en periodismo ya se está usando. Los diarios de la Argentina ya lo usan para las noticias. Pero, ¿vos le encontrás algún valor a la inteligencia artificial para nuestro trabajo?
That's interesting. I don't know if I'm a techno-optimist. I think I'm an optimist, but I think tech is, I don't know, it's going down a bad way right now with Mr. Sam Altman and Peter Thiel. But no, a lot of publications in America are also integrating AI. And when I was at Business Insider right before I left 2 years ago, we had they were teasing these special groups that were going to test the AI, and they had a thing where we could generate headlines and decks and little captions with AI. I think it's just short-circuiting your brain and cognitively offloading. If you're using it to write, I get it if you're using it to write something that's very functionary, or just something very basic that you wouldn't put thought into in the first place. But for something as personal as arts criticism, if you're using that to literally construct your argument, you're not. First of all, it can't. My dad said it doesn't have perceptions. It'll give you both sides of an argument. I guess I could see the argument for it if you're using it in the very baseline generating ideas way. I'm not a total AI denier. I think in some ways, it's a neutral technology, and it's about how you steer it. And it's fun in some ways to make almost a comedic musical gag that a real label and studio would never spend the resources to produce. I made one joke song that was with my extended family's their own personal foibles, and it did a pretty funny verse and hook with that. But the only way I use it right now is I have a transcription service called Descript that apparently uses AI. So I think using it as a tool to kind of support the non-writing aspects of writing could be beneficial. What do you think?
A mí no me gusta la inteligencia artificial. No me gusta. Pero bueno, ahora vamos a ir al momento Mark Fisher. Ibas a contar un poco lo de la izquierda y el brain rot.
Bueno, si quieren pasamos al brain rot de izquierda, que es otro de los fenómenos sobre los cuales Kieran escribió. Son estos videos bastante psicodélicos y absurdos también, que tienen una función más pedagógica, de algún modo, porque tratan de enseñarle a la gente las ideas de Marx. Acá en Argentina tenemos nuestra propia versión que enseña la doctrina peronista. Y Kieran, vos en tu artículo decís que de todos modos no sentís que sea muy esperanzador porque se queda en la superficie, pero yo pensaba que son nuevos modos de enunciación que necesitamos en este momento. Pensaba también en la dirtbag left, que sería como una izquierda sucia. Es una corriente, por así decirlo, de izquierda que apareció en Estados Unidos y propone básicamente contrarrestar ese modo de enunciación tan solemne y tan correcto políticamente del progresismo y ser un poco más vulgar, un poco más humorístico, apelando también a sensibilidades a las cuales no pudimos hablarles en estos años desde el progresismo, que bueno, acá en Argentina es un problema y allá con Trump también lo fue. Voy a mostrar un video de este brain rot.
Communist Party by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise the specter. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals and German police spies. Where is the party in opposition that has not been decried as communistic by its opponents in power? Where is the opposition that has not hurled back the branding reproach of communism?
Bueno.
Bueno, que Kieran nos cuente por qué se le ocurrió hacer este artículo. El brain rot marxista.
I think it's really fascinating, kind of like both with the dirtbag left and with this, there's this new wave of these, you know, it's like brain rot leftism, it's like the subway surfers, overstimuli. I find it really interesting to think about if somebody can be radicalized by a TikTok edit, by a shitpost. And I'm sure some of you know like Joshua Citarella, who wrote this book like around a decade ago, 8 years ago, called Politigram and the Post-Left. And it was analyzing how there's sort of like hyper-fragmentation of political ideologies on Instagram, stuff like anarcho-primitivism, and like all these transhumanist things. And it was kind of like people were doing like the aesthetification of like cottagecore stuff, but with political ideologies. And now there's like this new wave of like a brain rot version of that. And I do think like it's important to meet people where they are. And I spoke to some kids, like some teenagers, for this story I wrote for Pitchfork. And some of them said that they had been pretty apolitical or just like a normal liberal before. And then they saw these videos because the way the algorithm would serve it to you would be like in also like the underground rap sphere. So if you listen to somebody like Bullymon or Xavier So Based, you would start getting this stuff. And then that inspired them to read more about Marxism. I think there is sort of like a futility to it in a sense because, you know, a lot of this stuff is, you know, a lot of the thinkers that they talk about are people who are, you know, very niche, and at a certain point it becomes kind of like a sports game or like just like collecting Pokemon cards. You just like want this arcane knowledge about some like previous thinker without actually like engaging with it in real life. So I'm like, that was the kind of the question I was thinking about, like parody versus praxis, and like, can this stuff be meaningful? But before I wrote it, there were a lot of like alt-right and right-wing, far-right kind of conspiracy theory content related to these mythical lands called Vril and Agartha. And so this stuff was engaging in like the leftist sort of like parallel to that, this like Tibetan Buddhist thing called Shambhala. And so I think it remains to be seen whether this can have an effect, but I think, you know, there were a lot of edits online for Zoran Mamdani in New York, and that definitely helped him.
Well, one thing, you know, like about Mark Fisher's writing is he was actually very good at short slogans and kind of thought bombs. So, you know, hedonismo, depressivo, capitalist realism itself is like, almost like the whole argument of the book compressed into 2 words, especially if you have the subtitle, there is there no alternative? I think that's the subtitle. So he's very, you know, and there used to be an account after Mark's death on Twitter. I can't remember what it was called, but it's something like might have been Mark Fisher's Ghost or something like that. But they would take like 3 lines or 2 lines from his books and tweet them, and they worked really well. You know, it was a lot of intellectual nutrition in that small snack, you know, of the tweet. But I think for real political education, I mean, there's no substitute for reading a long linear argument, ideally in solitude, without music playing or other distractions. I think like, because leftist thought, I think, is about planning. You know, a lot of it is about planning and long-term projects, you know, and so the extent, you know, the game of having little bursts of ideas is dangerous in a way because it fractures that ability to sustain a thought process across, you know, an essay or a whole book, you know. So it's a difficult balance, I think. I mean, I think it's kind of cool that it's happening as a phenomenon. But I worry if it's still in collusion with these things that are destroying our brains, you know, and our ability to think long ideas, you know, arguments.
I think one of the reasons why like the manosphere exists and why far-right content has so much purchase now is because like the ideology itself it's so just like grotesque and so simple-minded, and so it lends itself very easily to just like, you know, low-effort TikTok shitposting.
Well, Mamdani did that really well with his. He worked out that thing of having like, you know, free buses, free fast buses. What were the other things? Free
universal childcare.
Yeah, like, and he repeated them over and over again, didn't he? Like just every, you know, that helped him win, I think. Yeah.
Decías, porque ya vamos a ir cerrando porque se nos termina el tiempo, pero ayer hablábamos de Mark Fisher como un Marcuse 2.0, como un bestseller universitario.
Yeah.
¿A vos te sorprende todo lo que sucedió? Vos fuiste amigo de él, estuviste muy cerca de él. ¿Te sorprende ver ahora que incluso acá en Argentina, porque aparecieron muchísimos especialistas de Mark Fisher, si te sorprende lo que ha sucedido con sus libros y sus ideas y sus filosofememes?
In a way, not surprised, but in another way, surprised that it could happen in this day and age. Yeah, I mean, I brought up Marcuse because I can't remember which one it was, Eros and Civilization or One Dimensional Man. I think that, like, this was like, you know, a big student bestseller in the 60s, and, you know, a lot of people were walking around campuses with it in their pocket, you know, and talking about it. And there have been other books like that in the past that are like become intellectual blockbusters. And it makes a lot of sense that Mark's book would do that for a number of reasons, not just the quality of his thinking and the writing, but like it's Capitalist Realism is quite a short book. He uses his own personal experience in a very relatable way, talking about mental health and his own depression, and so, you know, that I think that connects with a lot of young people. And then at a certain point, it becomes like a self-perpetuating thing. We had some friends around for dinner, and their parents are academics, and the daughter, who was 16, said, "Oh, Simon, I'm reading this book, and you're quoted in it," and it was Capitalist Realism. It just becomes like a word-of-mouth thing. And I think also a lot of people, many more people are familiar with the content of it who haven't actually read it as well. It becomes that thing that just sort of spreads, or maybe people, I think it's sold a couple of 100,000 copies worldwide now, and people borrow it, and they get it from the library, and they, you know, they might not even read all of it, but like, it's just, it's a phenomenon, you know, it's like something you don't see in these days. Even someone like Zizek, I don't think, has had that level of sales. and that, I don't know about impact, but like, you know, there are complex ideas in Mark's work, but a lot of the basic ideas are actually pretty simple. And they're quite, people who aren't intellectuals or read academic scholarly books can understand it, you know, because of the way he put them across.
Bueno, Antonia, tenemos que ir cerrando, como se dice en el mundo de la tele, pero voy a cerrar con una pregunta para todos, cada uno. Los soul farts y también los brain rots van a poder responderlo. Tenemos el doble, porque además armamos un montón de cosas y el miró que hizo Antonia es mucho más complejo y completo. Mostrémoslo como nostalgia de lo que no pasó. Pero
perdidos.
bueno, había un montón de cosas. Pero yo quiero cerrar con una pregunta para todos en un punto, pero más que nada para las visitas, pero nosotros también lo vamos a responder, que es, Simon, te hago la pregunta. ¿Te gustaría tener hoy 25 años como tu hijo?
I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of happy with the way my life unfolded, and you know, meeting my wife and having Kieran and our other son Eli, and you know, so to be young today, I wouldn't have all that. But there are definitely exciting things going on. I think, or at least I'm convinced by his excitement in them to believe that there are exciting things going on. I don't know. I think there's a lot of pressures on young people with social media, and it seems to, you know, there seems to be a lot of young people who are medicated, you know, and taking things for anxiety and depression. There were depressed young people when I was young, and you know, I was quite a miserable adolescent, young person. But it seemed like the pressures are stronger, and also the feeling of is there any kind of future seems to be worse, you know. You know, most of my youth, we were like, now I look at things I wrote in the 90s, and it's full of stuff about, you know, everything's collapsing, and, you know, it's quite doomy, even though I was very excited about the music I was writing about. Politically, it always seemed shit, but it was nothing like what's going on now, I think. You know, this is like a whole new level of shit, apocalyptic shit. You know, sort of unbelievable. It's like you can't believe the things are happening, and that people in power are trying to do. You know, it's just like it's like a nightmare. But so in that sense, I wouldn't want to be 25 now. But I think there are also there's a lot of things you can do with technology and ways you can find people, your soulmates and your spiritual allies or whatever, and you know, so there's always these new possibilities in the landscape of the now.
Bueno, y ahora me toca preguntarles a los jóvenes si sienten nostalgia de alguna época no vivida, que hayan vivido sus padres o que a ustedes les hubiera gustado vivir, por ejemplo. Vos me habías dado una respuesta muy interesante.
Yo soy un poco nostálgica en cierto sentido. Me hubiera gustado vivir los inicios de la rave y la época en la cual mis padres descubrieron las drogas sintéticas y estaban muy emocionados al respecto. Y también soy muy fetichista del siglo XIX, por algún motivo soy victoriana, pero a la vez, y a pesar del apocalipsis y del ascenso de las derechas en todo el mundo, creo que estoy contenta viviendo ahora porque mi relación con Internet es muy positiva y creo que es un mejor momento para ser una lesbiana y para salir a bailar hoy.
Me encanta. ¿Vos, Kieran? ¿Sentís nostalgia de una época que no viviste, que te hubiera gustado vivir? Que te cuenta tu
No,
papá,
I gotta say sorry, Papa, and sorry, old fart Pablo over there. I don't know. I feel like I have a privileged position where I get, like, my job is I get to analyze what's happening. So in some way, I'm both living it, but I get, like, the meta angle of being able to talk about it. And, you know, I think every generation likes to say that they're living, you know, it's the end of the world. And in some ways, I mean, there are really apocalyptic things happening. But I also, like, learned from my dad. I think he has a quote somewhere that's like, every generation deserves something to be excited about. And I think, you know, if we're young, we should be trying to find the most exciting thing happening right now and make a movement out of it. So I do often fall into like nostalgic sinkholes, but I'm never. It's more like I want to go back to my younger self in a way. It's not like I wish I lived in. Although maybe it would be cool to go to like Mesopotamia and hang with Gilgamesh or something like that.
Bueno, corresponde ir cerrando y yo tengo que decir algo, porque hice la pregunta, la tiré. Pero bueno, lo que voy a decir es que yo también estoy contento de la época que me tocó vivir, especialmente por las raves, y unas raves que viví en Córdoba, en el río, que ponían las luces en los árboles, estaba el río ahí. Son momentos como de Kairos, que se suele decir. Son momentos de intensidad que yo no puedo olvidar. Y ahí viene el momento cholulo de cierre. Y porque fui feliz conociendo a Simon Reynolds. Le agradezco porque es alguien que cambió mi vida. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Pablo and Antonia, for organizing this interesting journey through ideas, and it's been fun.
Muchísimas gracias. Y saben que ahora hay firmas de libros y algunas preguntas que quieren hacerlas, pueden hacerlas en ese momento. Pero Antonia, nos quedó un montón.
Sí, otro día nos llaman de nuevo y
Sí,
seguimos.
o lo hacemos por YouTube.
Más divertido.
Sí, por YouTube.
Bueno, gracias Kieran y
Gracias.
Simon y gracias Caja Negra.
Thank you.